Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dale, Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs working their way through spring practice. And this is kind of the time period during spring football where you start to see guys, really separate and kind of put a stamp on, hey, I'm going to be a difference maker for this football team going into 2025. Georgia has what sounds to have been a very competitive, very physical scrimmage Saturday afternoon, and you're hearing some really intriguing storylines coming out of that scrimmage. And Dill, I'm not trying to overreact to a spring scrimmage that I did not have eyeballs on, but if you're a Georgia fan, you are hearing all the right things that you wanted to hear going into 2025, primarily from the pass catchers on the outside. Georgia has put a lot of time and effort revamping this room going into 2025. You're bringing Noah Thomas, you're bringing Zachariah Branch, you bring in what I think is probably the most talented freshman class of wide receivers that we've seen Georgia bring in a very long time. You're hearing the things you need to hear from this unit going into 2025, but you're also hearing a few other names pop up on this roster that might be difference makers for this Georgia team in 2025. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, the Georgia fans, appreciate you guys. This has been a football team that has been really fun to talk about during spring practice where, yes, on the surface, there are plenty of question marks you have about this Georgia football team. But then you start diving into what this roster looks like, what this depth chart looks like, and say, look, there's a lot of potential answers on this football team as well. And you're starting to see some of those answers emerge. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, we both read some of the scrimmage feedback. We've been following this team as they've gone through spring practice. You make no mistake about it. The biggest and the best news that we've seen from Georgia spring ball here is these playmakers on the outside sound like they're legit, sound like they're stepping up. And it's a lot of the new faces that are coming into this program. What player has you most excited going into 2025 here?
It's honestly probably Taylor for me. And I'm certainly excited about Zachariah Branch. I know kind of everybody is because there's that like untapped potential feeling for him still. Like we saw him as a freshman take that punt or kick return back like the first
Opening night.
And I was like, oh, that kid's gonna be a Heisman this year. It was just like a different level of juice and athleticism. Taylor, though, to me, sounding like he has maybe a little more juice than I would have thought he had. Like I thought when he was coming out of high school, you're getting a really skilled wide receiver, really good route runner, really good understanding of the position, catches the ball. If he's a guy who can also mix in some ability and make some explosive plays, I think they might have a very big time day one impact maker in that freshman class of the wideouts.
And what stands out to me about Taylor, and for the Georgia fans who've been rocking with the boys for the last year when we broke down this kid when he committed to Georgia, Dill, he's not a one-trick pony. You see so many wide receivers coming out of high school, especially in this modern era where they're just big, fast, and work vertically down the field. And there's not much depth to their game at wide receiver. Taylor is not that kind of guy. He was an extremely polished route runner who understood the position at a very high level. And you're pulling at a string that I think is the biggest storyline for Georgia, and that is not only how can we create more explosive plays, like can we get pass catchers that can help go make plays down the football field, which, look, that is the most important metric on offense. If you can't create explosive plays, you probably ain't going to be that good of an offense, and certainly not a national championship caliber offense. The second thing that I feel like a lot of people ignore when you're talking this Georgia offense is if you get difference makers on the outside, it's going to help your run game dramatically. Part of the thing when I go back and watch Georgia in 2024, one of the things that really stands out to me is the amount of disrespect that opposing defenses showed to your pass catchers on the outside. Hey, we're going to play man coverage across the board. We're going to roll our safeties into the box and really load the box, stop the run, because we know that your pass catchers can't consistently go down the field and make plays. Where in 2024, when you had Brock, when you had Ladd, you couldn't do that if you were an opposing defense because you were going to get cooked by some really good pass catchers on the outside. Can we get back to the point where we got guys that scare defenses on the outside that make them respect what Georgia can do vertically down the field? Because if you get that, not only are you creating more explosive plays, but it's going to dramatically help your run game in the 2025 year too, which is probably project number one for Georgia on the offensive side of the football.
Because obviously the offensive line took the beating for the lack of run game,
Agreed.
and there were certainly some issues. Now, it was
Agreed.
mostly stemming from the tackle spot. I just don't think Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green played good enough football last year. You are probably right. When you go down like Colby Young early in the season with everything that happened with him, things did kind of change because he was the one guy it did feel like they felt comfortable, kind of like, okay, if you're one-on-one on the outside, we kind of trust that you're going to make things happen. He was able to do it a couple of times against Alabama. And when you didn't have him, like, yeah, you go to that Notre Dame game and you knew what Notre Dame wanted to do. They were going to do exactly what you said. They're going to play man coverage and crowd the box a little bit. And you just didn't, even when wide receivers were able to beat guys in those, it's like, are you dependable enough to catch the football? Like, everything was kind of working against Georgia by that point. I don't think they were just winning enough battles. They weren't catching the ball particularly consistently.
Colby Young, sorry to interrupt you. That's another name that's going to fly under the radar because he's not necessarily a new addition, but it's like getting him back on this offense is massive because you have essentially Colby Young coming back. You bring in Noah Thomas, who goes 6'5", 200+, works vertically down the field well. Zachariah Branch, well, what stands out to me about him is, from what it sounds like, he's happy with his role in the offense, and they're figuring out ways to get him involved. And if you can do that, he's going to be a playmaker. You said it best. There's some untapped potential in this kid that if you get him in the right situations, he's going to change games for you.
And honestly, I feel like they're probably going to use him similar to Arian Smith. I just look at, like, yes, Arian Smith was a very good athlete, but he didn't have the same sense as a runner. I do think that's something Zachariah Branch, when he catches those screens and kind of catches, like, when they try to get him the ball, he does have a really good understanding of how to set his blocks up, how to work off of things. Like Arian Smith, again, he could burn it for sure. We all knew that, but I don't think he had the same playmaking chops, let's say, as Zachariah Branch. And I don't say that to say Zachariah Branch isn't going to run routes down the field. I just look, that is still probably me an element of Georgia's offense, trying to get their wide receivers either on end or jet sweeps or end arounds. Screens. Like, you still need a guy who can do that.
Arian Smith was just never turned into a great football player. He's an elite athlete who is really, really fast, just never kind of put it together as an all-around football player. And I think that's what you're hoping for a guy like
Zach. That's going to happen for Branch too. It's not like a form product, but I do think he has at least the traits that maybe Arian Smith lacked at times.
I mean, we were making the Tyreek Hill comps for this kid as a freshman at USC, and I don't think those were totally unfair at the time. Now you got to see it kind of come together over the next couple of months and maybe years at Georgia. And then you love what you hear from the young pass catchers. The second quick tidbit that I'm getting is these young running backs. So it's Nate Frazier. We know Nate Frazier is kind of the guy, at least in my opinion, going into 2025. True freshman Bo Walker. Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson, they've both struggled with injuries and staying on the football field at Georgia during their time. I recognize their talent. Dill, at this point, it's like, hey, you got to either stay on the football field and kind of put it together, get off the tracks, because Bo Walker's coming. And Bo Walker was not this, 5-star running back out of high school, but it sounds like he is becoming a difference maker for Georgia in the running back room, which is big. But I think that the biggest storyline outside of the pass catchers emerging here is the offensive line rotation, where you got to replace a lot of really good football players. It was an underwhelming unit in 2024. The name that sticks out to us both, Dill, is Ernest Green. Like, can he rebound? And I think what's fascinating about Ernest Green is there's not a projection here. There's a projection for some other players on the offensive line across the sport. For Ernest Green, we've seen him play NFL caliber football. And then for whatever reason, I know some injuries were popping up. I get that. For whatever reason, it didn't happen in 2024. He's back healthy. He's emerging. You're hearing the buzz from him coming out of spring practice. If you get the Ernest Green, the peak Ernest Green that we have seen at times from this kid on the football field, fundamentally to me changes how I'm looking at this Georgia offensive line here.
Yeah, that would be a game changer because you said it. Like, we've seen him play such good football, and then last year him and Monroe Freeling both just weren't playing good at all. It didn't feel like for most of the year. And then obviously the other one is Bo Hughley. I think you're hearing some things about Jazair Jackson, and that's fun. Like, I'd be excited. I would have thought he'd be probably 2 years away, frankly.
Me too.
If I was a Georgia fan. I mean, if they can get him going early, that's fun. But Bo Hughley, to me, I just think you want a really competitive battle maybe for that other spot. Because Monroe Freeling, like, again, you see the talent. He does have the athleticism you want. He's got power. Like he has things. It's just like last year you didn't see.
I think you're too low on Monroe Freeland. We've argued about this off, like just sitting on the couch plenty. Like the kid was a redshirt freshman last year, and like it wasn't great, but I don't think it was nearly as bad as you kind of think. And if I'm a Georgia fan, like I'm not, don't listen to my brother. Like don't sell your stock on Monroe Freeland.
See, I think you want a very competitive battle with him.
Agreed.
I think you want Hewley to be in a spot where you'd be very comfortable putting him out there. Because again, I do think the lack of consistency at the left tackle spot with Monroe Freeland, it wasn't what you needed.
Yeah, that's fair. And John Jackson, I think, excites every Georgia fan. I'm not going to believe it until I see it in the fall, but that's exciting to hear. And another name, Michael Ewini and Dill. Yes, Georgia has to replace a lot of really good football players on the offensive line. They've also, over the last couple of years, have recruited that position very well. You're talking about Mike Ewini, Dan Calhoun. I mean, these are blue chip guys coming out of high school that are now going into year two that very well could blossom into reliable and maybe even dominant offensive linemen for Georgia. And then Juan Gaston. Like, just keep it in the back pocket. Like, he's a guy that if you ask me if there's a freshman in the SEC that could play on the offensive line year one, it would be Juan Gaston. And so we'll see how that emerges. But, again, very similar to the pass catchers, you're hearing the things you want to hear from this Georgia offensive line. Going to the defense real quick, and the one question I have is where's the pass rush going to come from? You know, you kind of lose your two guys in McKellen and Jalen Walker last year. The name that, and it's so funny because Georgia just recruits so well in the front seven, specifically on the defensive line, that guys get lost in the shuffle sometimes from a media standpoint. Like you just kind of forget about them. Quintavious Johnson making some noise. And we're looking for guys coming off the edge that can be game wreckers. He's one of those guys that you just kind of add to the list now and say, all right, he's another name that really could emerge as something Georgia's looking for in 2025, specifically when it comes to rushing the passer.
Yeah, and especially to be able to get it purely from your edge spot. Because again, when you lose guys like Walker and Michael Williams, like that's a really, really good dominant kind of duo, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe Harris, I'm like, the jury's probably still out to an extent. You probably need to see a lot more from him. I think maybe towards the end of the year, you started to see it, maybe as he got a little bit more healthy. But I look like Quintavious Johnson, he does have the makings of what like a really good edge rusher looks like. And even what you saw last year, you saw like the twitchiness, the athleticism, the length, that like he does have the tools for sure of what you're.
And he's still developing, Dale, because you go back and dig into him coming out of high school. He's played quarterback for most of his high school career until it's like, all right, you ain't a quarterback, but you can rush the passer pretty damn well. So he's still like learning the position. And if he puts it together, that's huge for Georgia. And Dill, when we have the conversation about where's the pass rush going to come from, you have a linebacker room that is by far the most talented in the country, bar none. I truly believe we're going to look back at this linebacker and like take a snapshot of the names that you see in this room. I really think we're going to be talking about like one of the best linebacker rooms we've seen in college football, period. And because you have so many just exciting elite names, you can get creative in terms of how you use these guys. And we're asking, hey, does Georgia have enough juice in the pass rush? Well, I think a lot of that production can come from this linebacker room. If there's anybody that can scheme it up for your linebackers to go make plays, it's Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart. Last storyline, safety depth. And this is, I might just have to put my hand up and say, like, I missed. When Jaden Harris specifically committed to Georgia from Miami, and we both watch a decent amount of Miami football, I was like, that we have not seen starting caliber play from Jaden Harris during his time in Miami. Well, Kirby Smart and company must have seen something, and that's why Kirby Smart gets paid the big bucks, and I'm sitting here in my basement talking it Sunday morning. Kirby Smart must have saw something, because you're hearing something about Jaden Harris, and then Zion Branch, you're hearing good things, and Adrian Maddox. Zion Branch intrigues me because he's a super talented kid. I mean, that's 6'2", 210, 11 second in the 100-meter dash, who it hasn't been great for him as a pure football player yet, but is extremely gifted, and he's been struggling with injuries. Like a healthy Zion Branch can contribute and can be a playmaker for Georgia in the back end as you're a little bit thin in that safety room going into the 2025 year.
And I kind of heard a Georgia fan on one of the message boards. I thought kind of a good idea, like, or I don't know if it was a fan or one of the staff members, but like
Yeah.
that idea of him entering into a Georgia kind of room, if you will, in the secondary where it is so ultra competitive and almost like does his level just naturally raise? Like
Yeah.
USC when he first got there was just such a broken defense, it felt like, and obviously
Yes.
it's starting to get better a little bit with Dan Lynn, but I do wonder you put
Yeah.
that level of talent in a room where you have a KJ Bolden, you have even like a Jaden Harris, who again, you said like you haven't seen great play. We didn't see great play from anyone in the Miami secondary. It didn't matter who they were. I think the coaching was clearly a big issue. Obviously, that's
Yep.
probably why they made the move they made. But I just look, you enter into a much more competitive secondary room. Does that draw something on a Zion Branch that we just haven't seen? Because you said it, like to be that big, that athletic at that spot, that is kind of what you're looking for. And at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you really only need one guy because I think you have your next safety, if you will, in KJ Bolden. I think you
Oh
saw enough
yeah.
from him as freshman. Like,
Yes.
yeah, you kind of got your next star, if you will.
Agreed. Agreed. And then I'm interested to see how they use a guy like Jonel Aguero too, who I'm high on going into year 3 as well. Look, it's March. It's late March. It's not trying to build a hype train coming out of Spit, but it kind of is. Like if you're a Georgia fan, like you're hearing
But
the things
also,
you
like
need to hear.
Georgia, like when they have to replace guys, it is like you forget about a Quintavious Johnson
Yeah,
or even a Chris Cole to an
we've seen
extent.
Georgia do this
Yeah,
for the
you
last
guys are
5
still kind
years.
of there and should be absolutely
We've seen them do this for the last 5 years. Put a ton of guys to the NFL, names that you might not be too familiar with. Outside of the Georgia fans know these guys, the national media won't, and they turn out to be difference maker studs as well. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.